Monetarism is a commonly known philosophy of macroeconomics, often associated with Milton Friedman, but it's actually centuries old. Monetarism is the view that money supply growth really matters for the business cycle. Milton Friedman in particular advocated a regime where money supply growth would be kept very stable. In his opinion, if money supply growth was too rapid, you would get excess inflation. If money supply growth was too slow, you would get a downturn, because Friedman, like John Maynard Keynes, believed a lot of wages and prices were sticky, and thus decreasing that nominal flow of expenditure would cause an economy to contract. Friedman was famous for suggesting that the Great Depression was largely caused because in the period 1929 through 1932, the Federal Reserve allowed the money supply in this country to contract very radically. Here's a good example of an economic downturn that came about and can be partially explained by monetarism. In 1979 in the United States, rates of price inflation and rates of interest were very high. Paul Volcker, who was running the Federal Reserve System, decided inflation was too high, and he applied the monetary brakes, so to speak. This was probably necessary, but it meant strong deflationary pressures on the American economy, and from 1979 to 1982, we had a sharp downturn with a lot of unemployment, and a lot of that can be explained by monetarist doctrine. What are the strengths and weaknesses of monetarism? The biggest strength of monetarism, I think, is that it predicts a lot of cases where the central bank pulls back on money supply growth and economies then slow down or go into recession, and monetarism is a fairly good explanation of how that happens. Monetarism, however, has bigger weaknesses when trying to explain what we should do to prevent this. The core recipe of monetarism is to control the rate of growth of the money supply. But which money supply? There are different measures of the money supply. They don't all move in tandem. And in practice, central banks have found it's not very easy to follow some simple rule of saying the money supply should grow 3% a year or anything like that. That hasn't worked in practice. It tends to lead to too much volatility. So in terms of policy prescriptions, monetarism is a bit naive, but its core diagnosis that deflationary pressures lead to downturns is essentially correct.